Don't sink in the knower. The awareness is the one that is circling. It's the one that is give rise to the mind, disengaging further from itself. Step back further from itself. This will end the attempt to end. Stepping back from the knower, much more. This is the starting point of the arising mind. It's the abode of the circling with birthing and rebirthing. Step back from the stepping back itself. Step back to disengage from itself thoroughly. Ending the ending itself. Let's go all the way. Stepping back all the way from itself. This will end all the ending. So that it will be truly not about grasping. Truly not about grasping for the non-grasping itself. Unwinding that discards itself without grasping itself. No grasping for the emptiness itself. The emptiness doesn't grasp itself. The emptiness doesn't grasp itself. To be superficial with just knowing and seeing is gonna be just fabricating this and that, circling in itself on and on. The knower, the awareness is still give rise to the mind. This is to be used only temporarily. Even awareness is the arising mind. It's only to utilize temporarily. No is not even know itself. Discarding is on its own, child. No is not know itself. Discarding is on its own. Since you still be superficial and enjoyment with just body and mind elements, this is like a loop. So step back furthermore from it. Stepping back to disengage from itself thoroughly. No grasping for the non-attachment itself. No grasping for the non-grasping itself thoroughly. Give it fully. Otherwise, the clinging, sentimental is not cutting through totally. Clinging with circling within the cycle of birth and rebirth is not totally cutting. Circling with just looking and seeing. This is clinging, a kind of clinging. With feelings, thoughts, recalls, and emotions. Step back completely. Step back from body, mind, and from itself. Give up the giving up itself. The give up is on its own. Disengage is on its own. No grasping for it. Give it fully. Don't be engrossed with just deludedly knowing or not knowing, on and on. This is a loop. Both knowing or not knowing deludedly is avijja. This is the origin of Samsara. Still circling in the arising and ceasing. This is not about awakening, knowing and be awakened and be blossom out. This is not about blossom out within the knowing. This has nothing to do with knowing or not knowing, awakening or not awakening, blossoming or not. Uninvolved, even within the uninvolved itself, is on its own. Disengage on its own. Disengage on its own. Uninvolvement is on its own. Non-attachment is on its own. Let's conclude well through Nirodha and Nibbana for Samsara. Let's Nirodha and Nibbana help end for Samsara and purify Samsara through the extinction and emptiness thoroughly. This is not to be engrossed with mindfulness, concentration, contemplation, meditative power, and wisdom on and on. Cut through even the cutting itself. Don't be obsessed with being aware and knowing within the wisdom, within the blossoming. Disengage on its own. What is there that is closing and blossoming? What is there that is being awakened or not? What is there that is blossomed and not, knowing or not? Not attachment is on its own. Be thorough with it. Disengage on its own thoroughly. No is not even know itself, child. No is not even the no itself. Don't be obsessed to circling around within just knowing and seeing. This is the loop of arising and ceasing. This is unable to cut through the deluded knowing. Constantly cut through the cutting itself. Disengage on its own. This is the essence of the enlightenment that is given. Once you know that there is a lot of projecting through the knowing and seeing, you have to step back to disengage on its own. That is cutting on its own, disengage on its own. Just give it completely, absolutely. Otherwise, there will be just the loop of circling within arising and ceasing, aiming, focusing only in that way. Even stillness within knowing is not the way. You have to step back furthermore from the stepping back itself. Disengage on its own. This has nothing to do with knowing or not knowing. It's not about knowing and being still in it. This has nothing to do with knowing or not knowing. Disengage on its own constantly. It has nothing to do with knowing or not knowing. Don't be concerned with knowing or not knowing, child. Being still or not, don't pay attention to it. This has nothing to do with knowing or not knowing. Disengaging is on its own thoroughly. Cut through the cutting itself. This is not just the act of cutting, knowing. Cut through everything, actually. Cutting even on its own. You have to step back furthermore constantly because the desire added on knowing so much. Always taking into account through knowing and seeing. So step back furthermore from disengaging on its own. This will ceasing on its own. It will cut through itself on its own. Don't pay attention whether it's knowing or not knowing. Don't be concerned with knowing or not knowing, seeing or not seeing. Step back to disengaging on its own. Cut through the cutting constantly. Enable to use the essence of the enlightenment. Otherwise, there will be just the unbearable and the loop of that within the knowing. Stepping back on its own, enable that. Enable to no grasping on its own. Enable it. Be thorough with it. Body, mind, and samsara is equalized as usual. The mighty force of the purification of the extinction and emptiness still equalized with samsara as usual. This is not just letting go of anything, discarding anything. Discarding is on its own. Letting go is on its own. Therefore, Nirodha and Nibbana is still equalized with samsara as usual. This is not about trying to let go of anything. The letting go is on its own. Still purify samsara through Nirodha and Nibbana equally with samsara. This is not to escape from samsara. This is a kind of great compassion that is given here for samsara, not avoiding and running away. This is not about Nibbana from samsara. This is the kind of Nibbana to purify samsara. The letting go is on its own with everything. It's not about the act of letting go of anything. Therefore, there is no such a thing that exists as in separating Nibbana from samsara. Disengaging is not disengaging from anything. It is on its own. It purifies itself. It cuts through itself. The cutting is on its own. This is not about separating cutting from anything. Cutting is on its own. This is not to separate cutting from all things. Cutting is on its own. Therefore, the great compassion is still given as usual. Still purifying through the extinction and the emptiness for samsara as usual. The great compassion is still there as usual for samsara. This is not about an act of cutting anything. The cutting is on its own. Disengaging is on its own. There is no such belief values that is a separating line for anything. This has nothing to do with belief values, traditional values, or any opinions, or any attitudes. Letting go is on its own, has nothing to do with any attitudes, any belief values. The past, the present, or the future. This has nothing to do with any kind of belief. Stepping back is on its own. This is not about stepping back from anything. Stepping back is on its own. Still purifying through the extinction and the emptiness as usual for samsara. No separating the emptiness from all things, or all things from the emptiness. No is not even no itself, all the same with everything. This is not to separate the emptiness from anything. There is no separation, no discrimination. Disengaging is on its own as usual, purifying through the extinction, evenly with everything. It's not about being obsessed to use knowing and seeing. Everything stepping back within itself, cutting through on its own. Stepping back to disengage from itself constantly without grasping for the non-attachment. Cutting without grasping for itself, extinction without grasping for itself. Don't circle within looking, seeing, and knowing. With everything proceed simultaneously, disengaging is on its own. Cutting deluded knowing and helping through the enlightenment is simultaneous. The mighty force of the cutting on its own is to be proceeded simultaneously. We don't give value to knowing or not knowing, seeing or not seeing. In this way, it will be thorough in purifying through the extinction and the emptiness. To be obsessed with knowing or not knowing, seeing or not seeing, then it's just a loop. It's not purifying through the emptiness or extinction for each other at all. The purification of the extinction is not about individual stillness or indifference. Disengaging is on its own simultaneously with everything. Non-attachment on its own with everything. This is the purification of the extinction. This is not about stillness, indifference, each one on one's own way. The mighty force must be beyond doing water blessing. If you take things into account so much, then step back to disengage on its own. Furthermore, stepping back on its own, furthermore, this will not having any traces left. With everything stepping back on its own, it's like no grasping on its own. So that there be no traces of samsara left.